All right. Welcome, everyone. It looks like we already have a couple of folks here joining on webinar. You are very punctual and love to see folks joining in early, eager to learn, if you will. If I haven't met you before, I am Chris Beauchamp with the Institute for Generative Leadership, head up our community relations. We have Andrea Bordenca on here, and she'll be joining us here in just a moment here. And just so you know, what we find a lot of times here is that folks are transitioning from one meeting to the next, so we usually just give it a minute or two for people to make their way, but we definitely want to be respectful of your time and not take too long, but we'll give it just a minute or two after the hour. And I want to welcome Silvia, welcome. Natalie, welcome. Laura, Kenya, Angelica, and then we got Gabriles. Okay, cool. All right. And I think I lost one of them. So already have some folks. And Drew, welcome. Good to see you. Stephen, welcome. We got folks already piling in. We actually have quite a few people that have registered for this webinar. So I think obviously this particular topic has grabbed a lot of attention here. So looking forward to this. I know for me personally, this has been a topic that has really helped me in my own leadership and coaching, and looking forward to what Andrea has to share with us. Paul, my friend, wonderful to see you on here. Bruce, thank you for joining us. I have other folks joining us, and just to let you know, we have just a minute before the hour, and if you're just now joining us, we will get started a couple minutes after the hour. For all of you that may be new to the webinar with the Institute for Generative Leadership, this is keeps you kind of behind the veil, if you will, so you're not actually seen, not to worry. But you do have an opportunity to chat with us, and I see, for example, Laura already chimed in here and just said good day. So, Laura, good day to you as well. So if you found that, you should find that option as well. And Paul, thank you as well. Your option should appear, if I remember correctly, in the upper left-hand corner. If I use it from the opposite, I always have a difficult time orienting from the opposite direction, but upper left-hand corner, you should see your options with chat and Q&A, and I'll go over that here in just a moment here. And we are right at the top of the hour, and wonderful to see. Josie, thank you for joining us. Marguerite, thank you for joining us as well, to make sure I try to cover everybody here that's popping in here. And welcome you. Hugh, good to see you on here as well. Donna, welcome. All right. So we'll give it here just another minute or two before we get started here. And just so you know, we are recording. And so if you want to come back to this at any point, we will have that recording for you really by the latest by Monday of next week. Might even have it at the end of this week. So we'll see how quickly we can get that. And I'm being reminded here from one of my colleagues here that's on with us now. Thank you for reminding us. We have the buttons there that are available for you. You can raise your hand if you just want to say, hey, pick me, or chat if you want to chat with me directly. If you have a question or a comment that you want to just interact with me. But if it's really meant for the group, we're going to invite you to post it into the Q&A, and we'll take it in the order in which it comes. So let me go on ahead, and since we're already a minute after the hour, and Paula is saying, yeah, you are muted. So just to answer your question, Paul, great question. Thank you for asking. In the webinar format, we can't actually hear you. So if you actually want to join Andrea on this call, like say you have a question, you want to engage in the conversation, which we actually do encourage, because this actually really lends to the learning here. I'll promote you to panelists. So if you say that, let's see, Marguerite is saying she can't hear me. So I'm wondering here. Let's see, I'll turn up my volume a little bit here. Marguerite, my volume's up. Andrea, do you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So if everybody can just chime in, yeah, just let us know if you can hear Andrea and I on audio. Laura's saying yes, and Angelica's saying yes. So I invite you to just double check your volume. Sometimes there's a couple different settings between sometimes the application, which I don't think that's the case here with Zoom, but on your computer. So looks like everybody else is saying yes, hearing us just fine. So yeah, Marguerite, sorry. Hopefully you're able to figure out, it looks like everybody else is able to hear us. So, and I'll try to help you out once we get started here and making sure you're able to connect with us. But let's go ahead and get started here, everyone, since we're already a couple minutes after and want to be mindful of your time here. Just want to welcome, first off, I want to welcome all of you. This is actually, we're doing this as a combo, both for the Leadership Circle and Coaching Excellence. We had the two separate webinars, but we felt that this was actually a really good topic that was meant for both leaders and coaches. And so if you noticed that it was that, and maybe you actually are signed up for both, but you got an invitation on both sides, that's what that's all about. So I want to first off, thank all of you for carving out a little time out of your schedules. We know that your time is valuable, and we're very grateful to have you with us. And if you're new to all of this, participants have told us that they found really a lot of value out of these webinars, and I honestly think, experience from hearing some of the feedback that you will too. If you're just joining us, my name is Chris Beauchamp, and I'll be your host on this webinar. And again, if you're new, just glad you're here. I want to give you just a little bit of background on generative leadership, as well as why are we here on this webinar. So, for those of you that know Bob Dunham, he's our founder, and it was about 35 years ago that he discovered that there were really a lot of missing skills for teams in leadership and business. And it was because of this that he founded the Institute for Generative Leadership. And this was really to support ambitious professionals to learn and develop advanced leadership skills. And these are skills practiced by some of the most successful leaders and coaches in the world. Many of you on this call are leaders in some role or some capacity to another, where you're committed to improving your organizations, your teams, or perhaps your coaching executive leaders. So again, we're blending both here. And it's really a commitment here that requires a different stance in leadership and coaching. And it's one where we treat leadership and coaching as a profession, including those of you that are managers. Generative leadership for us, it's about applied learning in action, not just a one-time opportunity, but a practice. These webinars are really a way for you to engage with the Institute in new conversations that develop your skills as a leader and produce a competitive advantage for you, your team, your organization, your practice. And if you, for all of you that have been on the calls from some time back, we've actually gone to a webinar format, as you see here. Bob Dunham, the founder, was leading those calls, but we're actually expanding our voice and our capacity through other generative leaders. So today, Andrea Bordenca, a graduate from the Institute for Generative Leadership, will be walking us through whole body learning as a way to create connection and impact. Personally, this has been really key for me and my impact, both as a leader and a coach for the Institute. Andrea, she's the founder and leader for Lead Yourself Youth, as well as chairperson and CEO of Desco Medical Service. She has a passion in bringing leadership to communities and creating healthier growth paths for youth. Her leadership background is in generative leadership, and for those of you know Strozzi, she has a background in Strozzi-based somatics. As chairperson and CEO of Desco, it's a medical emergency services organization, she has really an intimate experience being in and helping others navigate stress and anxiety, and I've seen it just in working with some of her leaders. Little logistics real quick for everyone. Since this is now a webinar, if you're just now joining, you have the opportunity to participate in different ways. So in the upper left-hand side of your screen, you should see a few options: a chat button, a button to raise your hand, and last Q&A. So if you need any support throughout the webinar, if you have comments that are intended to be private, please use the chat in this webinar, and I'll be moderating or facilitating those conversations. If you do have questions or comments that you feel would be valuable or should be shared as a contribution to this conversation, please do post that in the Q&A, and I'll take those in the order in which they come. So we have a lot of folks in on this webinar here. We already have 35 here showing up. We had over almost 80 register for this. So that being said, we're going to do our best to get all your questions and comments. We do invite you to actively participate. This is where your learning is going to have some fun, some impact, some meaning. Whatever your reason is for joining us on the webinar today, our question for you is, what is it that you're going to practice with what you've learned today? We've noticed that the most powerful generative leaders engage in practices of learning. Generative practices for us are observable, learnable, executable. And Andrea's going to be sharing some of these distinctions that she's actually learned in her leadership. Excuse me. If you hear anything today that you feel is really relevant, you want to explore this conversation a little bit further, I'm going to be posting my contact information in the chat. So let's do just that. Let's have a chat. If, as an alternative, you want to kind of start to explore, we also offer a complimentary leadership assessment. Just ping me and let me know if that'd be something of interest to you. And also, just a heads up for everybody, we're going to be sending out an email next Tuesday. I won't say exactly what it is, but for those of you that maybe haven't gone on with us in the Foundations workshop, I invite you to look out for that email on Tuesday. But let's stop there. Let's go ahead and bring it over to the reason you joined the webinar, and welcome Andrea to the webinar. Andrea, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Hi, thanks for having me. There's a couple of things that you said that I really like. And when it comes to the whole body learning, well, there's a lot of things you said that I really like, Chris. When it comes to whole body learning, you had mentioned applied learning and practice and a competitive advantage. Today, we're going to be talking about our body's role in the learning process. And really, it's about how we align what we care about, what we think about, and our stand in the world with more power and impact. And I love this conversation. I work with kids, I work with adults in this conversation. It's an ongoing practice for me. When I learned how to tune into and utilize my body in a way that was aligned with my thinking, I have a body as well, life got a little bit easier and effortless. So I'm going to talk about that because we cannot generate impact or power if we're fighting or trying so hard. So the idea here is to really understand what the role is of our body in learning, in action, and a competitive advantage. So the Institute, so I learned this from this learning at the Institute for Generative Leadership. And really, this was a huge blind spot for me. And in my executive coaching, in my coaching with kids, it's a huge blind spot everywhere. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to share my screen. And like Chris said, I can't see you, but you can see me. And if you do, this is a conversation. So when I say this is a conversation I love to be in, it's a conversation, so please do feel free to engage. Since we're talking about the whole body, these are my three boys, they're older now. Since we're talking about the whole body, let's just take a moment to acknowledge that we have a body. One way to do that is to just notice yourself sitting in the seat that you're in. Noticing the chair and your body against the chair. And settling in there. And a lot of times when we're sitting, we're holding. We're either holding our bellies, our stomachs, or maybe our jaw, or maybe our shoulders up. And it becomes a habit. It's an unintentional habit that we're going to talk about a little bit later that we form. So by just bringing attention to, are you holding anywhere? And just really settling in, relaxing, let the chair hold you. Let your bones hold you. And settle in. And taking a breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Bringing yourself into the present moment. And like Chris said, in the morning, we're running from meeting to meeting, from phone call into the next thing. So whatever you had going on before this conversation we're in now, just leave it in the past. The invitation here is to really be curious, really be curious. And also notice that if you're drifting, if your mind drifts, then to just bring yourself to the present moment by either noticing your breath or noticing that the seat you're in, settling in, feeling your butt against the seat and settling in there. So there's a practice, and we all drift. Sometimes during this, I might drift or lose my thought, and I'll acknowledge that and come back. It's a part of being human. And with that, what I hope that today we'll cover, before we get to that, today what we're going to cover, first of all, is setting the intention for curiosity and also fun. We can have fun with this. Learning can be fun. how our individual history impacts how we learn. That doesn't really sound fun, but I promise you, I think I can make it fun. And how to cultivate connection, not just with ourselves, with our body, which is important and a huge part of what we're talking about today, but also with others. Because when we deepen the capacity to be present with our bodies, we're able to connect better with others. And this increases our impact and power. So when we're in our thinking brain all of the time, what happens is we do a disservice to the rest of our body. We think really hard about problems that need to be solved. And it could be something like a math problem or how are we going to pay this bill. And so when we're in our thinking brain, we tend to power through things and override or suppress what's going on in the body. So if we do that and we become exhausted, it really minimizes our capacity to take action that generates power in this world. And we'll explore that today. So my hope is today, by the end of this webinar, that you'll start to see how your individual history shaped your experience and your relationship with learning, and that you'll have at least one new action that you will take with you to help you create more curiosity and less frustration in the learning process. And as you're becoming more familiar and aware with what's showing up, we're going to talk about the different emotions that show up with whole body learning and how they arise in the body, not just our head, the whole body. So my invitation and my hope here is after this webinar, that as you're in this exploration of your own history and relationship with learning and the different emotions, perhaps the ones that close down possibilities, self-doubt, frustration, that as you begin to become aware of that and you identify that you're sharing your learning with someone that you see in your life struggles, either struggles with learning new things, maybe gives up easily, or gets really frustrated. So if you think about a young child learning to tie her shoe, or learning how to ride a bike, or a teenager learning a new math concept, or navigating friendships, or an adult learning a new process, new software, maybe at the gym or on the golf course when frustration shows up, is that there's a way to be able to navigate from a point of frustration rather than build on it and close down possibilities. So why whole body? Touched upon it a little bit. And like Chris so eloquently said, applied learning and action. So we can't be in action without our bodies. We have our bodies, and we have this so much credence to our thoughts. So what happens is when we're kids and we're growing up and we're navigating school and learning, we really try to power through learning. And so what happens is when we are thinking about how we're going to accomplish something, we tend to ignore the body. So if discomfort comes up, if frustration, or if there's some kind of signal in our body that shows up, we're not trained to tune into that. And what different research is showing us, medical, neuroscience, research in psychology, and there's different branches. There's neurocardiology, neurophysiology, neurobiology, and what's showing us is that essentially there's three brains that we have. And so we have our brain in our head, our brain in our heart, and our brain in our gut. And what that means when I say brain is that each one has its own neurons, own nerve cells, and they act independently, but also interdependently. So this notion that we are rational beings, that our thinking controls the rest of our body, or we have to muster through things with our thought, is just not so. We have this information that's transmitting, it's storing, it's processing, it's communicating from our body, from our gut to our heart, to our head, all the time going back and forth. So when we're only thinking about our head brain, we are not taking into account that people have different learning styles, different learning paces. And so when we're in a classroom setting and we see that our peer is learning something faster than we are, then it might produce anxiety. And that might shut down possibilities. It creates a barrier to learning. Or if we're a high-performing student, we might have this this anxiety, this pressure to continue operating at a high level, so we're always in anxiety. So this is a nervous system, a whole body reaction. So the fact that in classrooms we're not acknowledging this is really a disservice. Studies in medicine, psychology, neuroscience, it proves that the entirety of our body is involved. And we have an opportunity. So this is my mission in life, is to leverage the data, integrate what we know about whole body learning as practicums into the school. So right now we learn about concepts, we learn materials, and we retain some of it, but not a lot of it. So by being able to integrate whole body learning to embody leadership and life skills, this isn't just about learning math, history, management. It's about intrapersonal skills, and it involves the whole body and our quality of life. This is going to be the topic of a future webinar, is how to integrate this into our school systems as practicums. And also, so the conceptual knowledge, thinking has its place, very important, but it also, like I had said, has its blind spots, not taking into account the different learning paces and the different learning styles. And I'm just going to check my notes here because I want to be sure. Yes, okay, so here's the irony too, is that when we focus on thinking, we have receptors all throughout our body. And because our focus and attention is on how we think and not what's arising, the sensations in our body, we tend to override when we feel a little bit tired, or if we are feeling frustrated, we're not acknowledging or being present with that. Instead, we're just not acknowledging it. So we're putting more effort and strain. So we get headaches. We strain our eyes. We tense up. Our shoulders are up high like this. And so we don't notice it until the pain gets so severe that we need Tylenol or see a doctor or to see a chiropractor. So if we're better able to at any moment, and do it right now, right? My invitation is just to tune in. Like, did you notice that over the course of the last few minutes that maybe you tensed up? So opportunity to relax into your seat, feel your butt on the seat, and just breathe. So when we're always in our head and we're not tuned into what's going on in our body, we tense up. And that produces exhaustion. It can produce physical pain. So this is really a quality of life issue, this whole body learning. And I'm just going to open it up as if there's any questions there. I'll just pause for a second. And Chris will tell me if there's any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't have anything as of yet right now. But again, the invitation for the sake of really kind of expanding the learning is to share your comments or questions. And by sharing, what we found is that sometimes your perspective, your question can open up something new for somebody else. So not just for yourself, but for others here on this webinar. So right now, yeah. Anybody? No, we'll leave it for right now. Andrea, I'll turn it back over to you.
That's cool. Okay, good. So becoming a leader is an ongoing learning practice. And I just want to set the distinction and interpretation of what I'm talking about with leadership. Leadership, every one of this webinar is a leader. So I know we have some teenagers that are here, and it doesn't matter what you aspire to in life. It doesn't matter what other people define as successful or leadership. In this interpretation, in this context, you are a leader because it's your life. And so when we are in alignment with what we want to achieve and what we care about and where we stand in this world, we can reorient to a future through practices. And so becoming a leader is an ongoing learning practice. So what I mean there is, if your aspiration is to be a leader of an organization, or it's to find a partner in life that you want to enjoy life with, it doesn't matter what it is, right? it's that once you achieve it, so say I want to find a partner and I find the partner, it's great. Now we're partners, I've achieved it. There's ongoing practices, there's ongoing learning that's a part of the practice of navigating that relationship. So as time evolves, my partner and I we're going to confront different challenges. So it could be healthcare or health breakdowns, job changes, whatever it is. So it's an ongoing practice. So by being able to understand that when we are in a relationship with ourselves and we're making an impact in life, to be aligned with our thinking and our feeling and our sensing, to move forward together, it's a whole body relational conversation. So even if I want to be a manager, so say I'm promoted and I go from being a performer to a manager, it's not like, great, I've achieved this, now I'm an expert, I'm done. No, there's a whole set of responsibilities that grows with being in management, and there's challenges and there's rewards. So being able to navigate that from a place from our body, from the capacity of our body, so we're not exhausted, we're not pushing through. It's an ongoing practice. So over time, we've evolved. So we have our mammalian, our reptilian brain, and we have our executive functioning, our forebrain that's evolved. So being able to integrate all of our sensing and feeling and thinking into how we live our life is an ongoing practice. And there's some practices that are intentional and some that are not. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about how certain habits that we form come from us needing a sense of safety. So Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist, and he came up with this pyramid, a hierarchy of needs for psychological well-being. At the base of this hierarchy is our physiological needs, our need for air, food, shelter. And right above that is safety. As social animals, we rely on communities. For our species to thrive, we need each other. And so having a sense of safety is really important. So if you grew up in a house where you weren't allowed to cry, so sadness wasn't allowed, you may have learned to hold back your tears. And so what happens is your body is creating a habit, and it's being reinforced, of holding. And maybe your jaw tenses up. Maybe you hold your breath. That was a way for you to get safety and acceptance and belonging from your caregiver. And the same can be so for any emotion or any experience that we create over time for our sense of safety. We're really intelligent, really able to create these habits over time that are reinforced that we don't even think about. And many people are under the impression that these are fixed and we cannot change them. But as we know with the ongoing studies in neuroscience, that we can rewire our systems and reorient and reshape ourselves into a new future. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Was there anything I wanted to say about that? Unintentional and intentional. No, it's just like, an intentional practice, learning to play the piano. You practice at it through iteration, it becomes a skill. It's your whole body that's learning that. Same thing, customer service. You want to be an awesome customer service rep. And so you're getting feedback, you're getting coaching, you're learning what you're saying, and you're practicing, you maybe a smile, hey, how you doing, customer service. And it's a whole body experience that you're in the practice of intentionally to get better at a particular skill. So why whole body? So this is this part of it. It's very important. So we have our thinking, we have our sensing, and we have action. So no matter what we do in life, when we take an action, it's based on some kind of emotional state that we're in. So this whole body, the connection, and we'll play around with this a little bit, this whole body being connected to what's arising, what we're sensing. gives us more capacity for choice and how to act. So say I am encountering, and I'm going to ask you to play around with me here actually, is thinking about a recent frustration that you had, like really thinking about a situation where it was either with someone at work or someone at home where you felt really frustrated, and just settling into like, what was that like? Who are you with? And just imagining with me here, what does frustration feel like? And if you take a moment as you're replaying this frustrated experience, take a moment to locate that in your body. And take a moment to notice your breath. What are your eyes doing, your shoulders? By thinking about certain situations, we tend to replay them. And we feel them in our body. They're stored in our body. And if you had difficulty, if nothing showed up or your mind drifted, that's cool too. Whenever we bring our attention or awareness to a new practice, or we're asked to do something new, there might be a story about, oh gosh, what if I'm doing it wrong? I should know better. I should be doing it differently. That's a part of the learning, the awareness of the learning practice process. So just notice that. And just notice the sensations that are rising there. And it's okay. This is normal. This is what we experience as human beings. And so for me, if you actually, this is an opportunity in the chat, if you were able to, when you tapped into that frustration, if you noticed as you were replaying the frustration, what did you notice? Did you notice anything in your body, your shoulders? Did you tense up?
And Andrea, let's see, we got a couple comments here. Paula, yes, I noticed tension in my shoulders, neck, and jaw. Natalie's sharing tightness, shallow breathing. Joanne, chest tightness, excuse me.
And just, too, as we're reading them, take a moment to shake it off too. Like breathe, settle in. We don't need to stay there.
Tension in my shoulders, yep.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. And I have a couple questions for you too, whenever you're ready. So.
Yeah, that's great. And that the frustration, noticing the frustration that shows up. So the reason why we're doing this, and I'm asking you to do this, is to show you that we have choice. So in frustration, we can stay there. And if we don't know what's happening and we're not tuning into, I feel this sensation in my body, we tend to power through it. So for me, like leaning forward, squinting my eyes, holding my breath, as I was practicing this and imagining my frustration, that's what showed up for me. So the invitation before we take any questions is just to settle into the seat, take a nice deep breath. If you're holding any part of your body, to just notice that and relax as best you can into the seat. Let the seat hold you. Just feel what that feels like, just to be in the moment, relaxed, and what's open and available to you in this. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah. So one anonymous question, let's see, was how did you learn all about things like this? The question, it was anonymous.
So I learned this, actually, the illumination for me was through the Institute for Generative Leadership, and really learning about how our mainstream thinking is based on rational thought, and our school systems are based on concepts, and how over time, with the increase of anxiety, depression that's showing up in human beings, that really what is bringing health, or brought me back to connection and health, because I struggled with depression and anxiety, was this learning of tuning into the practice of the body. And this is the coaching that I do, and this is the work that the Institute for Generative Leadership does as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we'll see. And
also, Susan Zeman my somatic coach, I'm learning she leads a long distance, listening to bodies long distance. I have actually references and resources at the end of this that are listed that will be sent out to you all. And she has done, as far as listening and being able to tune into other people, first we need to have the awareness of ourself before we can connect with others. So her teleclass, listening to bodies over the phone, long distance, has really helped me to continue in these practices. And that's a course that I'll be teaching in the coming year.
Perfect. And we do have some other questions so we can take now, or
Yeah, go for it.
yeah, let's go for one more. Stephen asks, is it possible that some people are physiologically wired to be more able to sense their body, and for some, the wiring does not provide the same information?
It's interesting. So from what I know about it, and I'm not a neuroscientist, is that it depends what habits have formed over time. So if the more that we practice something, the more that it's ingrained in us. And what we know from a study at, I believe it was UC Berkeley back in the 90s, is that it takes 300 iterations for something to become familiar in the body, and several thousand, 3,000 for it to be, or 300, yeah, to be comfortable, 3,000 to really start to master and embody it, thousands over time, with it going into default without having to think about it. So it's a matter of recurrence, intention. So being able to, and this kind of goes into my slides, so thinking about what is it? So say that I grew up in a house, so this is very common with baby boomers, is not only speaking when spoken to, right? So some baby boomers that I've worked with have a real difficulty speaking up and sharing their voice. And so they have this thought that I really want to speak up and I want to share my voice, but they don't know how because of the practices and what's been reinforced over time for their acceptance. And so when we feel a little bit of discomfort, what we tend to do, because we're sensing safety and familiarity, is we go back to what we know. So this goes into the sensing. So when we go back into what we know, we're falling back into old patterns, old habits. So really, the practice here in my invitation is to, when you're thinking like, I want to speak up, I want to have a voice here, is to sense what's being shut down, like, or what not, what's being shut down, to sense what's going on in the body that's disallowing this to happen. So there's a physiological sensation that we have, and a lot of times we don't like it. So when we feel discomfort, we tend to say, oh, no, that doesn't feel good. I'm just going to go back to what I know. And I speak from experience here. So being able to sit with it and to really notice, like, how is this showing up for me? How is this informing me? As opposed to trying to overcome it or override it. So when we sense what's going on, what happens is our language gives an interpretation of an emotion. So if we're talking about giving our voice, sharing our voice in the world, and we're sensing that, oh no, I have fear, I have contraction, I can't do it, then the emotion is fear. So being able to take action, fear might close us down. It's not going to open us to possibilities. So when we're aware that we're feeling that we can't take an action, this is when we ask for help. This is when we hire a coach or an accountability partner, or we ask for people in our community that we can trust to help us in these new practices. And that's going to help us get the reinforcement that we need to be able to take the action that's going to produce the impact in our life. And we're going to play around with this, I think, next. Yes. So our history, like I had said, there's certain moods that we're born into, okay? So it depends where we live, our house, our environment, our country. There's certain moods, and then we get reinforcement, and it's unintentional. We do have the power to be able to rewire and to learn how to engage in new ways. And again, this is through practice It's through asking for help, get a coach. We try to think our way through things, and it's exhausting. We don't need to do that. We can, when we tune into, I feel frustrated, or I have doubt, or resignation, which we'll play around with in a minute, that noticing that and being in that and saying, oh, gosh, like this, it feels what it feels like, and being okay with that. And then taking a step back to say, you know what? By being able to tune in to what resignation feels like in our body, we're able to have more choice available to us. This is when we ask for help, or we have a conversation with someone we love to say, you know what, I'm feeling stuck, or I'm feeling resigned, or I feel like I'm not making any progress here. And having a conversation gets us out of our own way. Was there any, I saw something pop up. I don't know if someone had a question before we play around with resignation.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, we have a couple other questions, and I just want to be mindful of the time. We have just about 20 before the hour here, and so we can take some questions here at the end if that works for you, Andrea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool because I want to play. So, and again, you're home in the privacy of you can play. You don't have to play here. But really, if we're talking about whole body, what I wanted to play around with first was resignation. So when we're talking about moods and how it lives in the body, if you start to notice people and how they engage in the world, you can start to see the different moods that they're in, and the language that they use, the stories that they say, starts to reveal the type of history that they have. And so by being able to notice what it feels like in our own body, that gives us the choice to move differently. But first we have to notice. So my invitation to you is to hunch over, to really like put your shoulders forward, eyes down, even sigh. Really like just like settling into this. Hunched over, and just stay here for a few moments and say to yourself, nothing I do matters here. Nothing I do matters here. Really, like, the invitation is to really commit to just being hunched over. Nothing I do matters. And in this, as I'm talking, just take a few moments for your own personal reflection. This doesn't have to be anything you share in the chat. This is just for you. Is this familiar? Are there areas of your life where you just feel like nothing you do matters? And as you're in this emotion of resignation, are there other emotions that are showing up? And just think about what's closed to you in these areas of your life where you feel resigned. And if you were able to shift out of this to ambition, what new things could be accomplished? And as you're reflecting, you can settle back in. Just shake it off. Just move your body a little bit, like, ugh. Ugh. This is what we talk, like this is I'm just going to make a quick distinction. Moods are long-term. So we tend to live in one or two predominant moods. Emotions are short-term. So if I have loss in my life, but generally I'm not sad or grieving, then it's going to be an emotion. And it could last months. But generally, emotions are short-term. So if I win the lottery, that's going to produce some happiness, but it's an emotion. It's a short-term. Moods, longer-term. But we can reshape our general mood and outlook in life by doing these practices and acknowledging that we have a body. So I wanted to say that. And here are the questions that I asked if you wanted to see those as you're thinking about this and shaking it off and settling it in. And I had invited you for your own personal reflection to just think about it. But if there are any questions that you have about this, I'm going to ask that we wait a little bit. So just note them down, because I'd like to go into ambition to kind of shake that off a little bit. So ambition practice. So this is the mood, right? Okay. Shoulders are back. Your chin is up. I'm going to look outside because it's a beautiful day. I'm in ambition. I really am. This is one of my predominant moods, by the way, if you know me. I'm looking at the trees and they're blowing in the breeze, and I feel like I'm settled in my seat, but I feel open. My shoulders are back. My chin is up. I feel like, so with resignation, it's nothing I do matters here. With ambition is anything is possible and I'm going to make it happen. So this is the mood of, I see what's possible here and I'm going to take action to make it happen. So, taking breaths in, energizing your organs, and really feeling open to the possibilities of life. What does that feel like? And take a few moments, I love it here, to settle in, feel what that feels like. And if you have a window, look out your window, or if not, imagine big expansive sky with trees blowing in the breeze. Life is big and expansive, and there's all sorts of possibilities there. And the same questions. Is this familiar? Are there parts of your life where this is familiar? Are there other emotions? What's open to you in these areas? So when we're in certain emotions and we take action, we're always in an emotion as human beings. And so when we're aware of the emotions that close down possibilities, we have the opportunity to shift them into ones that open up possibilities. And that can be by looking out the window. It could be music, having a conversation, asking for help, and shifting from that. So moods, just a little recap here. And I'm just real quick, Chris, how much longer do we have? I don't have my clock in front of me. Fresh.
Yes, we have 15 minutes here, and I'll need just a few minutes here at the end. We do have a couple of questions from Susan and Paul, and love to get them in here. And we can, just for Susan and Paul and anyone else that has questions or comments, we can stay on a little bit past the hour here. Happy to do so.
And in these emotions, like in the resignation, I'm not going to have a conversation if I stay there and I don't acknowledge that it's happening in my body, right? So I can't shift it if I don't have the awareness. I'm not going to go talk to my kid about possibilities I see, or my boss about possibilities I see. So it closes us down. So being aware of how it shows up, sensing in our body, and then the actions we take. It's an important key here. And, for me, my history, when I was growing up, just real quick here, is I had some teachers that were really, my performance as a student wasn't great all the time. And so one of the areas was my handwriting. I had a language arts teacher in 6th grade who helped me before and after school with my handwriting. I also had a 6th grade teacher in math who didn't like my progress with decimals and fractions. And when she called on me, I remember I was trying to sort through the problem, trying to work it out. And she was like, okay, you need to study more. So I did, came back, she called on me again, and she scolded me for not knowing the material. Yet, as we know, we learn at different paces. We have different learning styles. My father explained it. I totally got it. But when I was in the classroom in front of my peers with this like wanting sense of safety and belonging, I became very conscious, my thinking brain and I got fearful. I got very conscious of my peers, and I felt embarrassed, and I was ashamed for being scolded. I felt stupid. And so what happened was, after a few times of this teacher doing this and not being very friendly with me, I got angry. And when we're angry, we tend to want to punish somebody. And so in the anger, I would act out and misbehave. I became the class clown. And so this was a pattern. So I got my sense of safety and belonging from my peers, but I had a story that I wasn't smart, and it closed me down from asking for help because I was afraid I wasn't going to learn it fast enough. And so as an adult, I realized that doesn't have to be my story. That was my experience, but we tend to live our stories like they're facts, and they're not. So now I know how important it is to tune in and to ask for help. I love to learn. I learned this as an adult. Like I had no idea until I was in my 20s and my 30s that I actually liked to learn, but I had a story that I was a bad learner because I didn't learn fast enough. And that's the blind spot in our educational system right now that we will be fixing. So I can take questions now, Chris.
Perfect. Yes, because yes.
Or if anyone wants to join me, you can come on screen with me here.
Yeah, so Susan or Paul, if you just want to type into the chat to say yes, I'll promote you to a panelist, and you can join in with both. Paul, yes, awesome. So we're going to answer, just because out of respect for what I said, I'm going to honor it. And Susan, yes, awesome. So what we will do here is I'm going to promote Susan here to. As soon as I can scroll down here, we have quite a list of folks here. I'm going to promote Susan here. If I can get, my screen will let me get to her.
You're promoted to panelist.
Exactly. So I'm going to invite Susan here first here. It takes usually just a second here to have her join in here. And she has, Susan, brilliant, had a couple questions here. So let's see if we can get in here. Susan, you're on mute right now. So if you can click your mute button and ask away, please.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your offering.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, you bet. I'm interested in, also have a background in Strozzi. My first question was really one of my questions was, I'm working with a leader right now. And resignation was the perfect thing for you to choose today for me, because it's one of those things that has really hit a wall for this person. It's either like I have to fight out of hope or I have to resign totally. And in working with this person, one of the challenges is that we're not in person. They're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, so we're coaching through Zoom. But when I work to help her access what resignation might feel like in her body, she doesn't really have that literacy. She doesn't really have that entry point. It's actually more of no context for that whatsoever. I just wanted to know a little bit about how you create an entry point when people really aren't used to connecting with their energy in the body.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I appreciate that question. So the first thing that's coming up for me in that is, is she seeing where there are barriers to outcomes? Is she, because a lot of time, I'll just ask that question, leave it there. Is she aware of how it's getting in her way?
No.
Okay. So one of the things that I would suggest is if you can guide her in a way where she's talking about what she cares about, and you're able to make observations and assessments about what's showing up with her and how it's getting in the way, she's going to need to see how that's getting in the way before she's able to identify it in her body. So it's a blind spot for her, it sounds like.
Absolutely. It's a very deep conditioned tendency that has some real important reasons why it's there.
Yes.
But I do wonder, because most of my clientele, as it turns out, are corporate people, and I look for ways to first educate a little bit and then invite them into their body a little bit. Okay, send the elevator down. But I wonder, do you have that kind of challenge in kind of introducing something that's so resourceful and so basic to real change?
So that's the part of it is the first part of it is being able to connect to our cares. So if we're not seeing, like for me growing up, or as an adult, I didn't realize how important it was to ask for help to produce trust and build a team. So it wasn't until I was able to see what the breakdowns that were happening in the outcomes. So for me, it was a loss of profit, customer retention, employee retention. So being able to link what's the outcome that we're seeking in life, and how does that align with our care, I'd say is the context. It's the underlying context for being able to enter into that conversation.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, it makes sense, right? So we're smart. This is how we're trained to understand the different concepts of emotional literacy. But then being able to have a concrete example of how it impacts us, that's where it gets challenging. So sometimes people get really interested in having a coach because they're like, this stuff is cool. And they get lost in the cool. But then being able to apply it is, that's the work, right, of coaching, is what we do. So there needs to be that, there's that emotion, that educational component for sure, to set the context, and also aligning it with cares and what's going on in this person's life. So if there's certain conversations that she's avoiding because of her resignation, then sort of pointing to specific instances where, hey, did you notice in that conversation, what do you think that was all about? And just asking questions there. And what does that feel like? And here's my listening. Here's what I assess is going on. How does that land on you? So trying to make it as relevant to specific situations and their cares would be my recommendation there.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
You're welcome.
All right there. Sorry about that. I'm going to go ahead and, Susan, I'm going to move you to attendee, and we're going to bring in Paul, if that's right. Unless, Andrea, you have anything else you want to take care of here. We're going to wrap up here in just a minute. So
it's just a little bit of summary.
Okay. Yeah, we have 5 minutes here, and before we actually end, so if everybody can hang on here. So, and I do have a couple little things to share for those of you that have stayed on here. Actually, most of the folks have stayed on here. So I'm going to take Paul, and then Tina also had a question. Tina, if you're able to hang on here past the call time, would love to answer your question as well. So Paul, I'm going to go ahead, my friend here, and promote you to panelist and have you ask your questions as well. And so Paul should be joining in here in just a moment. Stephen asked a great question. He wanted to be able to see all panelists. So if you are able to, you should see an icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, at least on my end, I do, which allows you to toggle between views. So that way you can see either just one person or multiple people at the same time. But Paul, welcome, my friend.
How are you today? Good to see you.
Just fine, thank you. Andrea, I love when you share your vulnerability about how you're not perfect and the challenges that you've gone through to get to where you are. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
And I just had two things, one comment and one question. What you're describing with the gut as the third brain is this wonderful evolution from what I first encountered, like 30 or 35 years ago, about the triune brain with the reptilian and the mammalian brains piled on top of each other and the human cerebral cortex. But adding the gut is just this whole different dimension that's so physical. So thank you for that. And I wanted to ask if you notice or if you know any literature about correlations to gender, because the stereotype is that men are stuck in their heads and their words and dreaming and possibilities, and women are more in tune with their bodies. Is there any data on that now?
I have a lot. That is an area of interest for me, for sure. And I've done a lot of personal reading, reflecting, and exploration there in conversation. And really, so there's certain things, because of our social conditioning and the world that we live in, there's certain societal invisible structures that exist. And so there's certain dynamics that are perpetuated. So like if you're raising a girl and you're saying, don't get dirty, or you're raising a boy, so there are certain things that we do through language and interaction that are perpetuating certain stereotypes. As far as how we're wired and, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I don't know a whole lot about that, but what I do know is that for me, when raising 3 boys, it's very important to me that I'm very careful with my language, about gender, about what I expect, because I don't want to perpetuate certain roles, like, women are caretakers and men aren't, those types of things. But I'm happy to have a side conversation with you about that. As far as literature goes, I'll give it some thought. There's nothing that's coming to mind now, but I do know that there's a coach here in Boston, I believe her name is Ann Litwin, and she does a lot of research. She's got a book on gender. And so she's got a lot of history there. So she's an interesting cat to talk to learn more about that. Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it addresses it and it opens the possibility. So I'll look forward to continuing with this.
Awesome.
As we go along.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Paul, great to see you. Thank you for sharing your question there. And I'm going to move you to attendee, my friend. And at that note, we are really just at the top of the hour here. We do have several other questions here, Andrea. I know time flies. You were thinking 20, 30 minutes. And
I had another thing I wanted to do. I know, I told you. Yeah, seriously.
I know. Well, we have actually 4 more questions. So Tina, Hugh, Sylvia, and Angelica, if you can stay on, please. I would love to make sure we take care of you in this and have your questions answered. If Andrea, you can stay on, I'm going to stay on. Make sure you have your questions answered. I'll try to be really brief, just make a couple of quick announcements. I mentioned that next Tuesday, we'll actually be sending out an email, and I invite you to take a peek, particularly if you haven't joined us on a Foundations workshop, because there's a little something special for you, particularly since you joined us today. And if what you found today was relevant, this is the kind of work that's making a difference for a lot of the leaders and coaches that are joining us in this generative learning. And Andrea, really, she talks about it. She is a living, breathing example, a practitioner of how generative leadership is making an impact. And she took her organization, for example, she doesn't like to toot her own horn too much, but she took her organization from red to black and, doubling revenues, tripling that margin. So if you look at things that are, for those of us that might go a little bit more practical or we want like more tangible results, she's doing it, but she's also connecting with other human beings. And I can say I've been able to do it, but it's really powerful. So I invite you to that. I invite you to connect with me. You can reach me at 303-919-9493. I did put that into the chat. So reach out if you just want to explore possibilities. And last, we have a Q&A tomorrow at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. It'll be noon. If this is producing some curiosity, if you're like, well, I wonder what my leadership could look like, what my coaching practice could look like, where can I take this? And I'm putting myself into this mood of ambition. Then I invite you to a conversation. There's really no pressure. It's really an open place for you to come and explore and see what you want. So you can go to our website and you can sign up for that Q&A under the events. But other than that, Natalie shared with me, it's under the live events as well. I'll stop there. Thank all of you for joining us. We still have folks here on the line. And I'm just going to take the questions here in order of which I received them. So let me just see if I can get back to Tina here real quick and her question.
And thank you to those who have to go. Thank you for joining.
Yeah. No, we still, I love this group too, by the way, Andrea, because there's always a good number of folks. We still have 25. We started off with like 43 and 25 still hanging around. So thank you, everyone. Stick around. Let's see what else we have what other questions we have. Tina, Andrea asks, regarding doing it fast enough, how do you respond to work colleagues who engage in this behavior?
Yeah. So when you say that, are you referring to needing to learn how to do something? Like they're not, they're struggling to do it at a pace that's satisfying to them?
Well, let's see. So Tina, if you're still there, let me just scroll here and see if you're still on here. Hope you are. Yes. Yes, she responded yes.
So my recommendation there, if it's with a coworker, is well, there's a couple of things. So one is helping them know that this is normal. Like when we want to, we're always in such a rush. And sometimes things happen. Sometimes we learn things faster and sometimes things just take longer, and that's okay and that's normal. I cannot tell you the amount of people that I talk to who I'm in awe of, who have self-doubt, who think they're not enough, who feel like they should learn something faster, or should be, whatever the story is. And so I think having like a real conversation, this is a real great opportunity for organizations, is to have real, doesn't matter what your role is, to have conversations about learning styles and learning paces. And why is it that we feel like we have to learn something so fast? Like, what is the story there? Like, what's going on? And entering into a conversation about like, here's what shows up for me, and you will be amazed. Everybody, just about everybody, if they're sharing and there's trust there and they're open about it, will tell you a story about how there are certain things that they just feel like that they need to, or they should have learned faster, or they should know by now, or there's a lot of shoulds that we have. So being able to enter in a conversation, however you do it, maybe it's if you're comfortable with this person, going to lunch with them and just saying, gosh, I'm noticing that you're getting frustrated. What's going on? Sometimes I get frustrated too. Sometimes just having someone there to relate to and to be able to talk to opens up new possibilities. So it's, we can never change anybody, right? But what we can do is we can become more self-aware and influence. So the more we're aware of what's going on with us, the more we can influence and help others, no matter what our role is, no matter what their role is with us. Does that answer your question?
That sounds good. All right. Andrea, from Hugh, he states here, this week I was invited into interaction with an organizational board who have been through a tumultuous period of time. Their voices are saying, we want a new future with fresh vision, but their underlying mood and posture reflected the heaviness of their recent history.
I've been there.
When I inquired about their intention to move toward a new future without revisiting the history of breakdowns, I was met with some resistance. However, how can a coach effectively bring awareness to a group of their underlying suppressed mood in order to create better possibilities for creating a new future?
Yeah. I actually recently have been in a similar situation. So the conversation that worked for me was asking, what are we here for? What is there's this past that we have, and there were a lot of things that were closed down to us, and accepting, like, okay, let's accepting that happened. What is it that we're aiming for? Why are we in this conversation? What is the vision we have of the future, right? And so if there is this like continuous story of, the past, or we try that, or, nothing is going to change, it's really getting clear on how do we write out what, if we could get into a brainstorming session of like, if anything was possible, what does the future look like? And it might be like changing up the environment a little bit to get them out of their own ways, to help shift them, infusing a little bit of excitement, but changing it up a little bit to get them in a different type of, different environment for a different conversation. So changing the environment is one thing. And then being able, like, if you can get into a mode of like brainstorming, and then with the standard and setting the criteria that this is a brainstorming session. So if someone says, but we can't do that, it's like, nope, this is anything's possible. We're like thinking big, we're getting excited, and anything is possible. So there's no barriers here. That's not what this conversation is. You can have a brainstorming conversation to generate the ideas, and then you can say, you know what, and then I propose we have an implementation or design conversation separately. But right now, let's talk about let's get excited here. What do we envision for this? Like, what's this conversation? What does the future look like? And just start putting it on the board and then getting crazy with it a little bit. And sometimes what happens there, or what I've noticed, what's happened in my experience, is that people are able to get out of their own way, and you're in a community of people who are now like sharing ideas, and then people some of the people who were maybe negative or closed down a little bit will start to say to somebody else, wait, no, this is brainstorming, so that we can put that aside. Like, let's think about this. So everyone starts to get a little bit excited, and then the team starts to get a little bit more cohesive. So that's been my experience, and shifting the environment a little bit helps as well. Yeah, does that answer? Does that help? Is that helpful?
Yeah, if you would just type yes if it does, or if you have another question, let us know. I'll give it a second. He says, so you are inclined to not revisit the past breakdowns?
Well, it depends, right? So if there's this mood of resignation that's, yes, getting in the way of a future outcome, acknowledging it. So I'm going to go back to what I said before, which is acknowledging, like, this is what happened. Let's accept it. What do we need to do to anticipate these breakdowns or avoid them from happening again? So you can have that conversation first. What do we need to do to avoid these breakdowns from happening again? And then shifting the conversation, once you identify what those breakdowns and those barriers are, to anticipate them. And that would be more of like a strategy meeting, revisiting the past, anticipating the future. Then I would still recommend having a separate conversation where you're talking about, okay, now that we know that there were certain things that there were breakdowns and we're anticipating those, what do we, like, let's create the vision for the future, because the practices and the conversations that got everyone to where they were in this resignation are a part of the history. So being able to acknowledge that, to talk about that, to anticipate that, and then level set to have a conversation about, okay, now that we know what the breakdowns are, let's reorient. What do we brainstorm? What do we vision for the future? And then in the design phase, to be able to say, what are the practices and conversations and actions that we need to have to get to this vision that we agreed upon? So acknowledging it and being able to anticipate breakdowns, and being able to level set and create a new vision with new practices and new habits to organize differently together. What worked? Questions you can ask. What worked for us in the past when we coordinated together, and what didn't? What are the reasons? Why did these breakdowns show up? So then when you're designing the new practices for the conversations to get to that new vision, you're like, okay, we know what didn't work and we know what did work. So what are some new practices or new conversations we need to introduce here to be able to continue to get the results that we're seeking?
Beautiful. I think that looks like Hugh says, just like that, Andrea, acknowledging and then resetting. Thank you.
Yes.
That sounds like that gave a good answer. Yeah, and definitely a lot of generative learning. When we go to even just the foundations, you'll learn a lot of this and a lot more. But we really move ourselves, Hugh, out of the how questions to more contextual questions, like the what questions are really helpful in a coaching practice that can shift us to our ability to answer the how question. So I'll just add that as a little nugget as well.
Right on, right on.
Andrea Sylvia asks, I am learning now about Polyvagal Theory. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Excuse me if I did not. Which seems to be quite aligned with what you are talking about, and for people to recognize their vagal state. I'm not sure if that's really a question, but do you speak to that at all, or do you have some familiarity with this theory?
Well, what I know of that is, if it's related, right? There's the vagus nerve that runs from our brainstem down throughout our body, and so being able to be present, acknowledge, tap into that helps reorient us and shift us. And there's actually practices that Suzanne Zeman taught me about how to be able to tap into the vagus nerve. So I don't know much about that in particular, but I suspect that there's some relation there, because it is the nerve that runs throughout, it's the longest nerve that runs throughout our body. But it sounds fascinating.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. And Sylvia, if you have another, maybe a more specific question around this, by all means, go ahead and type it into the chat. I think I saw you were still on at one point, it looks like. And then one last question here that I have, at least that I'm seeing at this moment, is from mi querida Angelica. She asks, what would be the first steps for breaking a pattern when the client is aware of it?
So awareness is great because that's what gives us the capacity to choose where we want our attention to go. So once a client is aware of a particular pattern, then it's a matter of co-designing. So creating, what are some practices that you think, or what are next actions that you can take to help you? So if you're aware of this, it's getting in your way, what are some things that you can do to create new patterns? And then if you're the coach, being able to coach them through it, hold them accountable, and then just asking them, what do they notice? So I'll give you an example here. Is one of my coaching clients, she was really shy, and I worked with her on the phone, and that was her story. I'm really shy. I'm like, well, tell me, what's this mean, you know? And so when I had asked her how she was sitting, because I couldn't see her, she was hunched over with her eyes down. And so I said, interesting. So how does that show up when you're dropping your kids off at school or you're interacting with other people? And she's expecting people to, you know, talk to her or see her, but she's not looking at them. So her practice, and I said, well, what's a way that we can get you to feel more comfortable around build that, you know, she didn't want to be shy anymore. She wanted a community. So together we came up with a practice of saying hi to people, cashiers at school, starting small and just saying hi to strangers and maintaining eye contact. And it was terrifying for her. It was uncomfortable for her, but she knew that this was what I want to do. And so to be able to come up with practices, and it became uncomfortable at times, but because her commitment was, no, I want friendship, I want community, I'm going to continue to do this through the discomfort, it became way more comfortable. And ultimately she became a Cub Scout leader, very active in our community, just because of that little practice. So if there's a way to say, okay, what is something that you see somebody else is doing? Like, what is it that they're embodying? And is there a way that you see that you can take some actions to get to where you want to go? Does that help?
And then Helika, if you can kindly just type yes, if that helped. Yep, very much. She responds. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And any other questions here? Because I think we wrapped up our questions. And then, of course, Andrea, if you have any, last here to add here and
so yeah, just stuff to put into action. Commit to curiosity when the frustration, like, oh, interesting, I feel frustrated. What is that like, right? Not like, oh no. To open up, shift possibilities, to really be with it, be in curiosity. Putting into action, awareness and choice. When discomfort arises, be with it. What is it like? Continue to breathe. And then take a rest or break if your body needs it. And it just gives you capacity to choose, to have conversations, to get rest. Share your learning. There's opportunities that we talked about that you can practice. And the question is, how has your history with learning shaped how you learn today? That's something to think about. And this is the resources and references that I spoke to that were a part of my preparation for today's conversation. So I don't know if there's a way just to send out, you know what, could I send out this slide to you, Chris, and send this out, or do you send out the whole slides?
We can send out the whole, really, it's really going to be a recording here. So people will actually see this slide in the recording here. So just know that the list of these books will be here. If you want to send this separate slide as a separate file, by all means, we can definitely do that here, well, at least when we send out the email to everyone here. So beautiful. And there was Andrea. She's so modest, just puts up her slide here for just a minute. or not even a minute, half a second. So there we are. There she is. And
What's that saying?
and
Possibility?
if you all have not been to a Foundations, Andrea is now helping us in co-leading some of our Foundations of Generative Leadership workshops. And at some point, I believe she will be leading her own with us. She's also one of our program coaches and quite talented at that. So, you know, if you've enjoyed this, you join us at the Foundations, you'll actually get a chance to be with Andrea face to face. So great experience. I've personally learned a lot from her. I've learned as well in just this work. So another perspective. If you're considering what is really the relevance, if you're listening to this recording, for example, and saying, well, I wonder what the relevance is for me. For example, if you're in a business development role and you're connecting with another human being, particularly if you have video and in person, this body dynamic for me personally has made a huge difference, because when I'm paying attention and I'm really connected, other people are open to connecting with me. And I've actually been not through manipulation, but able to shift the conversation in a very open, fluid, kind of graceful way, if you will. And so I invite everybody on this call to really take this to heart. Whatever your role is, whatever you're trying to take care of, you know, that this is a powerful practice. So again, as we opened up this particular webinar, what is it from today that you're going to practice? And if you're curious what else is available, well, reach on out to us. So you can reach us at info@generateleadership.com. I'll stop there. Andrea, anything else you'd like to say before we wrap it all up here? We still have 11 people hanging out. I love all the folks here still hanging out here. To Deborah, you know, folks from Desco, Kenya, Melinda, thank you for joining us. Paul, Sandy.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Yes. Oh,
yes,
Stephen.
Thank you. That's what I
Stephen, real quick, Stephen, did we answer your question from earlier? I typed it in the chat. I don't know if I caught it or not, but if you're still there and listening, you can type yes, or if you have another question, by all means. I'm still here, so is Andrea, if you have another question. So type yes or no into the chat, and I'll hang on here. Yes, you answered. Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure you were taken care of here or there with your question. I was hoping so, but just double checking there. So. All right, everyone. Andrea, thank you so much for sharing here the whole body learning, and hopefully everyone is taking something here from today and moving it forward into their leadership or coaching. And have a wonderful rest of your week. Look forward to seeing you here on the next webinar.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.